everyone. Welcome to our 5th edition of Our Lives, Our Tales. So I'll talk a little bit about Nazariya and Our Lives, Our Tales before introducing the panelists with us. So Nazariya is a queer feminist resource group, and we have been working, we are quite new. We've been working since 2014 to build capacities of organizations, colleges, college students, and other activists on building a queer perspective. We work on issues of gender sexuality and queer women and trans persons issues. We also conduct, we do crisis intervention work, we do research and advocacy, we do, so Our Lives, Our Tales is one of the programs that Nazariya has been hosting since 2016, when we received some copies of Hamjin Si from Tarshi and some leaflets from Tarshi, and we realized that people do not know about the history of queer organizing, of LGBTIQ organizing beyond Section 377. So that's when we decided to basically invite activists and talk about their lives and their activism. And this last month, we invited Sappho, we invited Labia, LBT Queer Collective, we invited Maya and Indira from Vikalp, and we invited Rumi and Sunil. And they basically spoke about early LBT organizing. And so today we have with us Deepa and Ahana from Sahayatrika. Deepa is a queer, gender fluid, intersectional, queer and feminist activist who strives to oppose caste, class, fascist and ableist oppressions in her all endeavors. She grew up in Regina, Canada, and lived in Vancouver and Montreal before doing a roots trip and returning to Kerala over 20 years ago. She has been living in India ever since. She started Sahayatrika as a project in 2002 in her efforts to find other queer community in Kerala, and then it grew into something much larger than her own personal journey. She engages with various contemporary and traditional arts. We have with us Ahana Mekhal. Is it, am I pronouncing it right? Ahana Mekhal, yeah, is a queer pansexual activist, and she's interested in addressing the issues of all marginalized peoples and their diversity. She lives in Thrissur, Kerala, and she is the program coordinator for Sahayatrika.
Ritu?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, continue.
Yeah, she's the program coordinator for Sahayatrika. So, so welcome Deepa and Ahana. And Yeah. So we have with us Sunil also, who is the board member of Sahayatrika. Hi, Sunil.
Hi.
So first, the question to you, Deepa and Rahana. What does Sahayatrika mean, and how did it all start? Like, how did it started? Like, you talk about coming from Canada to do a project in Thrissur, in Kerala, and why did you come to Thrissur, and why Thrissur, and why Sahayatrika is the question.
Okay, well, and so I just want to say that Ahana's more comfortable speaking in Malayalam, so I'm going to translate for her. And Sunil, since you're here, if I miss anything for translation, please help. And yeah, my parents are Malayalis. I was born and raised in Canada. I studied European literature and philosophy, and then I was involved in the women's movement and the anti-violence movement, in movements with women of color, queer people of color, this kind of thing. And I wanted to know more about where I came from. I wanted to do this roots trip. So that's why I ended up coming to Kerala. And as a queer person, I basically tried to find community. And that was, I mean, I first came in like 1999, you know, and I sort of started meeting people in 2000, 2001. And I had lived in many kind of very queer / trans social spaces, like in the last, you know, few years of my life. Obviously, I didn't grow up that way. And so I just wondered where all the queer people were and all the trans people. And when I met people, they were very isolated and stuff. And I had managed to connect with two sexual minority organizations outside of Kerala. One was Sangama in Bangalore and one was Sangini in Delhi. And so they both had made suggestions about trying to make a project in Kerala. One thing was there was all these newspaper reports of suicides of young women, the women / I'll say now women / trans men, you know, who were committing suicide. And there was a gay man in Thrissur who was a university professor, and he was feeling very isolated and sending these news clippings out to, then I think there was like an e-group, like LGBT rights, or there was just an e-group. There was no Facebook or social media. And he was sending this out and saying someone needs to do something about this. So we, part of the project was to make fact findings about this suicides and also to make a crisis helpline. You know, so we just started a project. And actually, because I had been involved in the women's movement in Canada, and that was a very kind of queer affirmative space for me. That's how I came out, was in the women's movement. So I was looking for support from women's organizations in Kerala. And I also thought that Kerala was the so-called progressive state, and it was very, you know, famous internationally. So I thought, you know, there would be something there. I thought there'd be some sort of awareness. You know, I didn't expect there to be something very big because the society was conservative. And so when I talked to, I tried to meet different social activists, and people basically didn't know anything about it. And they had the same sort of homophobic or transphobic attitudes in the mainstream society. And so I talked to people in the women's movement, and they didn't really want to associate with me or what I was doing, but they said that Dr. Jayshree and Maithreyan were there, and they had been working with sex workers, and they'd been organizing sex workers movements. And so, you know, I met them, and we had many common politics. And so Sahayatrika just started as a project, like kind of an experimental project with their organization. And they were also interested in doing stuff around queer issues, but they didn't actually, they didn't have anyone who was willing to kind of be out about it. Mm-hmm. And even I wasn't actually that out about it. I used a fake name and started this project. The name, when I first came to Kerala, I didn't speak Malayalam, and so I asked this gay man's partner for some names, and he gave a bunch of names, and Sahayatrika I thought was a very beautiful name. It means a fellow women traveler. Now the name, it's a little bit complicated because not everyone in our organization identifies as women, but it's a thing that it just seems like through the years people have continued to identify with it. And you know, like Sahayatrika, it started out as a project. Then after 1 year of our helpline, we decided not to take funding. So then we were just kind of a loose group of people, but people were still using the name Sahayatrika. And then in 2008, you know, our community people didn't feel like their needs were being addressed by other organizations, so they wanted to form their own organization. So we went through this sort of process where we did all these consultations with all the queer and trans people that we knew, LBT people, which is something I'll talk about. But and so we registered the organization, and on and off again we were having funds. Oh, the name site, yeah. And so basically the idea was to have kind of a democratic community-based organization. I think I've skipped a lot of things. I don't know where to go with this. I think,
so during that time, there were a lot of women and trans men committing suicide. We heard from the news. So the women's movement was not looking into the suicides at all, or what? Because these are violence against women cases. These are domestic violence cases. These are cases that natal family forces them to commit suicide. So I wanted to ask you that the women's movement is very strong in Kerala, and so they were not looking into these suicides at all.
Yeah, I mean, actually, this thing about the women's movement being strong, it's a, you know, I think it's a, I think it's a contentious point. And I know, like, actually, Ahana is going to talk more about our, like, sort of current situation, and she has some things to say about that, about, you know, the sort of perception that, you know, Kerala has a kind of queer-friendly government and this kind of thing, you know. So, like, but even then, like, people were pretty ignorant. And I mean, this gay man who was trying to publicize these issues, he knew many people in the women's movement, and people did not want to talk about the issue openly. And it was related to, you know, like, I mean, basically sexuality wasn't considered to be a serious issue. It wasn't considered to be a social issue. And many people were ignorant. Like, they thought that we were doing lesbian fact findings because we were trying to prove that there were lesbians in Kerala. Like, people were just, like, there was no visibility. Like, people were just convinced that there were no queer people, you know. And so that was kind of the level of awareness, you know. And I actually had some very, like, painful experiences trying to get women's movements to take it up as an issue.
Yeah, because we do still struggle with women's movement trying to take up the issue, and we have fought ourselves long battles about women's movement trying, like, forcing or asking the women's movement to talk about these issues, but we hardly see women's movement addressing these issues. And I can see Sunil nodding the head.
It's all over like that.
Yeah.
So we have been continuing.
But you know, I feel like in that way, like, our history was different in that, I don't know, like, we had, I mean, like, the mainstream women's movement didn't support us, but actually I mean, the other thing, there was always this issue of identity, right? People said, you know, someone has to come out and then they can talk about the issue, you know. I'm not a lesbian, I'm not a trans person, so I can't talk about this issue. We need to have people who come out, and mostly people weren't ready to do that, you know, for obvious, you know, it wasn't a safe kind of environment. And so the thing is, because, like, a lot of our supporters were feminists from the women's movement.
Yeah,
you know,
yeah.
That was, like, our kind of strongest, you know, base, you know. And I think, like, it's still not necessarily a mainstream women's movement subject, but the thing is, there's always, you know, I mean, that's actually been for many years, that was before the queer movement and the trans movement became stronger, that was really our strength. You know, so, but it was kind of like not necessarily the mainstream.
Yeah. Ahana, you want to add something about it?
Women's movement.
About your journey also. How
Yes.
you end up coming to Sahayatrika, and your role with Sahayatrika, and
ഞാൻ മലയാളത്തിൽ പറയാം. എന്നെ സംബന്ധിച്ചിടത്തോളം ക്യൂർ മൂവ്മെന്റിന്റെയും സഹയാത്രയുടെ ഒക്കെ ഭാഗമാകുന്നത് വളരെ ചെറിയ പ്രായത്തിലോട്ടാണ്. ഇപ്പോൾ ഞാനൊരു 6th സ്റ്റാൻഡേർഡിലൊക്കെ പഠിക്കുമ്പോഴാണ് സഹയാത്രയെ പറ്റിയിട്ടും ക്യൂർ മൂവ്മെന്റുകളെ കുറിച്ചിട്ടൊക്കെ അറിയുന്നത്. കാരണം എൻ്റെ ചേച്ചി ഒരു ക്യൂർ വ്യക്തിയായിരുന്നു. സഹയാത്രയുടെ തുടക്കം തൊട്ട് സഹയാത്രയുടെ ഭാഗമായിട്ടുണ്ടായിരുന്ന ഒരാളാണ്. അങ്ങനെ വളരെ ചെറുപ്പം തൊട്ട് തന്നെ നമുക്ക് നമ്മുടെ പ്രിയപ്പെട്ടവരെന്ന് പറയുന്നത് ഈ സ്പേസ് ആണ്, ഈ ഇടങ്ങളാണ്. നമ്മൾ ഇവിടെ തന്നെയാണ് എൻ്റെ ഒരു വളർച്ച എന്ന് പറയുന്നത്. അപ്പൊ അതുകൊണ്ട് എൻ്റെ ഒരു കമ്മിങ് ഔട്ട് ഒന്നും എനിക്ക് ഒട്ടും ഡിഫിക്കൽട്ട് ആയിരുന്നില്ല. എൻ്റെ ഐഡന്റിറ്റി തിരിച്ചറിയാനൊന്നും എനിക്ക് അത്തരത്തിലുള്ള ഒരു ബുദ്ധിമുട്ടുകളൊന്നും നേരിടേണ്ടി വന്നിട്ടില്ല. എന്നെ സംബന്ധിച്ചിടത്തോളം വളരെ സ്വാഭാവികമായിട്ടുള്ള ഒരു പ്രക്രിയ മാത്രമായിരുന്നു എൻ്റെ ഐഡന്റിറ്റി മനസ്സിലാക്കുന്നത്. ഞാൻ അങ്ങനെ അത്തരത്തിലൊന്നും ഒരു സ്ട്രഗിൾ നേരിടേണ്ടി വന്നിട്ടില്ല. കാരണം ഞാൻ ഈ ഇടങ്ങളിൽ തന്നെയാണ് ഉണ്ടായിരുന്നത്. എനിക്ക് ഫാമിലി അങ്ങനെ സപ്പോർട്ട് ഉണ്ടായിരുന്നതുകൊണ്ട് എനിക്ക് അത്തരം പ്രശ്നങ്ങൾ നേരിടേണ്ടി വന്നിട്ടില്ല. ഇപ്പം സഹയാത്രിയിൽ ഞാൻ സഹയാത്രിയുടെ ഭാഗമായിട്ട് കുറേ കാലമായിട്ടുണ്ട്. പക്ഷെ ഒരു 2016 ഞാൻ സഹയാത്രിയിൽ സ്റ്റാഫായിട്ട് ജോലി ചെയ്യാൻ തുടങ്ങിയിട്ട് 4 വർഷമായിട്ടാണ്. എൻ്റെ ഒരു നോക്കിക്കാണൽ ഇപ്പം ഈ ഒരു വിഷയത്തെ പറ്റിയിട്ട് ഫെമിനിസ്റ്റ് ഗ്രൂപ്പുകളാണെങ്കിലും അല്ലെങ്കിൽ മറ്റ് സോഷ്യൽ മൂവ്മെന്റുകളും ക്യൂർ ആളുകളുടെ സമീപനം എങ്ങനെയായിരുന്നു എന്നുള്ളതിൽ ഇപ്പം വളരെ അടുത്ത കാലത്താണെന്ന് തോന്നുന്നുണ്ട് കുറച്ചുകൂടി വിസിബിൾ ആയിട്ട് ഒരു ക്യൂർ സപ്പോർട്ട് നിലപാടൊക്കെ ഇത്തരം മൂവ്മെന്റുകൾ എടുത്തിട്ടുള്ളത്. ആദ്യകാലത്തൊക്കെ വളരെ നമ്മളോട് ചേർന്ന് നിൽക്കുന്ന ചില വ്യക്തികൾ, ഇത്തരം രാഷ്ട്രീയം സംസാരിക്കുന്ന വ്യക്തികളും വളരെ ചെറിയ ഒരു സപ്പോർട്ട് മാത്രമാണ് എനിക്ക് തോന്നുന്നു ക്യൂർ രാഷ്ട്രീയത്തിന് അല്ലെങ്കിൽ ക്യൂർ മൂവ്മെന്റുകൾക്ക് ഉണ്ടായിട്ടുള്ളത്. അല്ലെങ്കിൽ സെക്ഷുവാലിറ്റിയെ പറ്റിയിട്ട് ഇപ്പൊ ഫെമിനിസ്റ്റ് ഇടങ്ങളിൽ പോലും സെക്ഷുവാലിറ്റി അഡ്രസ് ചെയ്യപ്പെടേണ്ട ഒരു വിഷയമാണോ അല്ലെങ്കിൽ അതിനെ എങ്ങനെ അഡ്രസ് ചെയ്യാം എന്നുള്ളൊരു കൺഫ്യൂഷൻ ഫെമിനിസ്റ്റ് മൂവ്മെന്റുകൾക്ക് അകത്ത് തന്നെ ഉണ്ടായിട്ടുള്ളതായിട്ടാണ് തോന്നുന്നത്. എന്നാൽ തുടക്കം മുതലേ തന്നെ വളരെ സജീവമായിട്ട് നമ്മുടെ കൂടെ നിന്നുള്ള വ്യക്തികളുണ്ട്, ഫെമിനിസ്റ്റ് ഐഡിയോളജി സംസാരിക്കുന്ന വ്യക്തികൾ ഉണ്ടായിട്ടുണ്ട്, അവരതിനെ അഡ്രസ് ചെയ്തിട്ടുണ്ട്. പക്ഷെ ഞാൻ പറഞ്ഞൊരു വലിയ ഒരു സൊസൈറ്റിയുടെ ഭാഗമായിട്ട് നിന്നിട്ട് അത്തരത്തിലുള്ളൊരു നിലപാട് എടുത്തിട്ടുള്ളതായിട്ട് അറിയില്ല.
So she says that she's been aware of queer movements from a very young age, like 5th standard or 6th standard, because her sister had a queer identity. Her sister's partner was a trans man, and so she was exposed to community for a long time. She was exposed to Sahayatrika for a long time. Her sister was the person with me who we registered the organization in 2008 together. And so she says that for her, kind of coming into her sexuality and her identity happened in a very like natural way, because she was exposed to the issues for a long time. And she says that she thinks that, yeah, like feminism always had this issue around that feminism always sort of had this the issue around accepting sexuality, and they didn't know how to accept sexuality, and so for a long time they weren't involved. But we did have some people who were very strong with us, and she says that until recently, like this kind of thing of having more like queer movements and more trans movements is a relatively recent development. But before that, it was always just very small groups of people who were kind of aware of the issues and supporting them. So now, can you add anything? It was long, so I lost it.
Yeah. I'll just add certain things into this. Right? One is what she said is like, no, because of that journey only, it was not very difficult for her in terms of coming out.
Yes.
Identifying herself and coming out was not that much of problem. Ritu, can I add certain things into this?
Yes, please.
See, like your first question is like Sahayatrika. It was started in Trivandrum, basically.
Yeah. Oh, so, yes, that's true. Yes.
Yeah. So started in Trivandrum, and later, because wherever Deepa goes, it goes with that. So then Deepa came to Kottayam. Then sometime we worked in Kottayam district, and after that we were discussing that where to shift. So then we thought, okay, why we chose Thrissur? Because it was Thrissur was basically cultural. It was a cultural city. So
Can you give more examples about it?
Say something actually, and I want to add something that I didn't say properly in the beginning. No, but actually, for sure, we had a lot of supporters there somehow. Like we had one lesbian couple in our group who was living there and had a lot of support because there were a lot of sort of activists there, and there were a lot of artists there. And so, relatively speaking, we felt there were more supporters. That's how we ended up in Shore at that time.
Yeah.
But I just want to say, like, the thing is, it didn't. In a way, Sahayatrika didn't start in a very organic way, like, you know, the way some other collectives have started where there are people who are living, who are in the place and they're from the place and they decide we're going to start a group and we're going to get our friends together. But the thing is, it also, because of the way it started and because of who was involved in it, we ended up with a very different type of community, you know, like, and also because of the fact findings themselves, like these suicide fact findings, we call them lesbian suicide fact findings. Now I would just say queer/trans fact findings. The thing is that almost all the suicides were people who had other marginalizations. They were working class, they were Dalit, they were Muslim, they were, you know, they had different marginalizations. And so like when I was talking to people about gender, sexuality issues, you know, and people would say the things that people all over India were saying, it's an upper class issue, it's a Western issue. And, you know, then for me to be talking about it, you know, from that's exactly how people see me, right? And you know, rightly so, I guess. But but then the people who came to us in crisis, or the people who we met in the early years, like Sunil and Sunil's friends. Sunil had a bunch of friends who were like all trans men, but they didn't have that identity. There was no organization then, and I met, you know, being a sister, I met Ahana when she was 10, but like all these people, they weren't privileged urban English speaking people, you know? And so that was like a big part of who our base was. And because this visibility thing was really a thing, like, and most of the people who were like it's not like being in Delhi or Bombay where it's an urban center, right? So people who were kind of like middle class or English speaking or whatever, they weren't ready to come out. You know, there was too much to lose and stuff. And the people who ended up coming out were the people who needed the support, and they didn't have other choices, you know? And like, I mean, like Ahana, because her sister, and because she grew up with queer people, you know, so she has a kind of a special perspective, you know, but of course her sister struggled, Sunil struggled, you know, people, you know, were living, you know, I mean, they were having these queer lives and trans lives without any language for it, without any identity, without any organizations, you know, and that's like, so like now we kind of have a mixed base, but I think that because we started out that way, we ended up with kind of a different type of population than in cities. Like maybe like Maya's group would be more similar, or, you know, Lesbian, Sangama that came a bit later, it's more similar, but in terms of the sort of like class and community background.
Yeah. No, it is an interesting perspective that you threw in about who we're working, and also it brings to the next question of the series, this session, is that what would Sahayatrika want to say about LGBTQ folks then and now? If you see any difference, like you said that the trans identity was hardly seen or there, but trans men were part of it. Why did you start working with trans men as opposed to working with trans women? And yeah, this is a question that I want to ask. And also the perspective that Sahayatrika worked with then, and has the perspective changed now when you work with LGBTQ persons?
Okay, chosen Mansilayo. Okay. Sunil also can answer this, I think. Why did trans men came to us? It's not that we decided to do it. Like actually the first project I wrote for was lesbian and bisexual women empowerment, you know, kind of thing. That was like, you know, and it's not like I also, you know, friends in Canada had trans men friends, but it hadn't. But then both in terms of the people who wrote letters to us, in terms of the fact finding, and in terms of the people that we met, many of them were trans men, or not. Well, I mean, now would call themselves trans men. Many of them were gender non-conforming people.
It was that time that like we didn't have that language.
Language, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So we started. Okay, when we started the there was other organizations for trans women, and obviously firm was working with trans women and sex workers, and all these things were there. And so the struggle was like, the female assigned people to get a space for that. So that's how we thought. And I think,
do you have local name for lesbian, bisexual, trans men, or you use lesbian, bisexual, and
yeah, we use that. But there is like same sex.
Same sex.
Yeah, so that Malayalam is there, but for all these other words, there is no Malayalam.
No, okay.
Words.
And,
yeah, and I just want to add some more thing with
yes.
Sahana, because Sahana is not only Sahayatrika coordinator. Hana's journey I have seen from like very closely, because she have been involved in different movements. I think in Thrissur, a lot of movements were there, and she was involved in all this thing, the film screening things, which took place, and there is whatever program happens in that academy and whatever. So it is all kinds of movements she been involved, and her politics is also like, it become very
is
strong.
very rich also, culturally very rich.
Yeah.
As compared to other parts.
Well, I wanted to say, the thing is with, I mean, as you know, like, the thing is like all the words for sexuality that are kind of accepted in Malayalam are very like Sanskrit words. So they're not like words that people would use commonly. And then the sort of words that are like, other words for sexuality that might be more like, I don't know, less Sanskrit or more Dravidian or more local, they're tere, like they're like swears, So that's the thing. Like, I think that people don't like, I mean, I'm not the best person to talk about it, but it's very, I'm interested in it. But like, there's not that much of like an indigenous, like most of the movement people we know, they use English words to identify themselves, like it's, yeah. And in Kerala, there wasn't even these like sort of Hijra cultures, so like I think like places where there were like Hijra cultures or Aramani cultures, like language kind of evolved in those communities, but somehow that wasn't there in the same way in Kerala,
Yeah, and I think Kerala's sexuality movement started like standing on the base of sex workers' rights. From there only we started, and in that sex workers' right, inside that we try to bring sexuality and gender and all these things. Actually, that's how Kerala's movement actually started. So they are the ones who first got organized. Sex workers' movement is the first movement which got organized in Kerala.
Very interesting.
Obviously, like organization like FORM and like my friend and Jayshree and all these people were there, and because of that only we got that
space. Yeah. So when you started working out in Sahayatrika, like when the project started and you registered, what were the kind of work that Sahayatrika did, and what are the kind that you are doing right now?
See, the thing is like first when there was no helpline, Deepa was using a phone, and Deepa's phone was working as a helpline. And when Sahayatrika did this, sorry?
Deepa's personal phone number.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's true. But
That has been published.
actually, I need to back up. Like, no, actually, because we met like we had this project with Firm, and I was there, and two feminist women were there, and we had this project, and we had this helpline, and we had people phoning the helpline, but we never met anyone in person at that time. People were very, they just called for help. And after the project was over, like we had hundreds of letters, and then after the project was over, the people who were involved in our organization, they were basically political people, and they decided not to take funding. They decided that, they didn't want to do a funded project. They wanted to make a sort of grassroots thing. And after that, we met people like Sunil and Bina, like Hannah's sister and all of that. So actually, like the year before I met you, we had a helpline that was paid for with our project. And after that, we had the project go. And then for like 5 or 6 years, my phone was the helpline.
Yeah,
and
the personal phone was a helpline. And after the report came out, after the suicide, like fact-finding report came out, I remember that there was a news write-up about the suicides happened in Kerala in Madhubhumi supplement. I remember reading that.
That was before
After that, people, so once the number is there, people started calling in that. So from
that
there,
was before we met. Yes.
From there, our work is focusedly on crisis.
On crisis. Yeah.
Well, yeah, I mean, not only on crisis, but crisis is a big thing for sure. I mean, and I'm gonna I have to talk about it. Like, I mean, I think besides crisis work, it was about I think that we did a lot to introduce, or not only introduce, like sex workers movement there, but these issues of sexuality within the kind of progressive movements, because that's where we found our support. And so we were doing a lot of discussions. We made a book. We like this kind of thing. So like I think we played an important part in introducing this concept of sexuality. As political rights, and we did so we did awareness raising also. But I'm gonna so like for 5 years we didn't have funding at all, and even when we got funding it was just small. So yeah, basically I had a phone. When I moved to Kottayam, my house became like an out office, and people were always there. And then, I learned Malayalam during this time also, because when I came, I didn't speak. So then I became a crisis counselor, and whoever was beside me was a crisis counselor. So I always had community people beside me, because they'd be staying at my place or this or that, and a crisis would call, and I'd talk to them, and I'd give them to the person beside me. And that's how we handled crisis. But and then after 2008 we started sometimes we were getting funds, and then for a while we had office, and we had community staff, but our board were more like feminists and other supporters, and we had a supporter as our director. And then like in the last few years we've had a community-based organization, and our staff is all community people, and our board is all community people. And Ahana has been working as a staff. She's known us for like over 10 years, but she's been a staff for 3 years, so she can talk about our current work.
നമ്മുടെ പ്രധാനമായിട്ട് സഹയാത്രയുടെ പ്രവർത്തനങ്ങൾ ക്രൈസിസ് മാനേജ്മെന്റ് പിന്നെ പബ്ലിക് അവയർനെസ് പ്രോഗ്രാമുകൾ മറ്റ് മൂവ്മെന്റുകളുമായിട്ട് ചേർന്ന് നടത്തുന്നു. എന്നെ സംബന്ധിച്ചിടത്തോളം ഞാൻ സഹയാത്രയുടെ ഒരു യാത്രയെ നോക്കി കാണുമ്പോൾ പറയാൻ ആഗ്രഹിക്കുന്ന 1-2 കാര്യങ്ങളുണ്ട്. നമ്മൾ എപ്പോഴാണോ സഹയാത്രയുടെ പ്രോജക്റ്റ് സ്റ്റാർട്ട് ചെയ്ത്, അല്ലെങ്കിൽ സഹയാത്രയുടെ ഓർഗനൈസേഷൻ തുടങ്ങിയ കാലം തൊട്ട് നമ്മൾ ക്രൈസിസ് മാനേജ്മെന്റിന്റെ നമുക്ക് ഒരുപാട് പരിമിതികൾ ഉണ്ടായിരുന്നു. ആ സമയത്ത് ഒരുപാട് പരിമിതികൾ ഉണ്ടായിരുന്നു. കാരണം ഒരു സോഷ്യൽ അക്സെപ്റ്റൻസ് നമുക്ക് ഉണ്ടായിരുന്നില്ല. നമുക്ക് വിഷയത്തെ വളരെ ഡയറക്റ്റ് ആയിട്ട് അവതരിപ്പിക്കാൻ പറ്റുമായിരുന്നില്ല. വളരെ ചുരുങ്ങിയ ചില സുഹൃത്ത് വലയങ്ങളോ അല്ലെങ്കിൽ ചുരുങ്ങിയ ചില നെറ്റ്വർക്കുകളോ ഉപയോഗിച്ചിട്ടാണ് നമ്മൾ ക്രൈസിസ് ഡീൽ ചെയ്തുകൊണ്ടിരുന്നത്. ഇപ്പൊ എൻ്റെ ഒരു അനുഭവത്തിൽ നിന്ന്, ഞാൻ കമ്മ്യൂണിറ്റി ഓർഗനൈസർ ആയിട്ടായിരുന്നു ഭാഗമായിട്ടുണ്ടായിരുന്നു. ക്രൈസിസ് കൂടുതൽ ഇടപെടേണ്ടി വന്നിട്ടുണ്ട്. എൻ്റെ ഒരു അനുഭവത്തിൽ എനിക്ക് തോന്നിയിട്ടുള്ളത് ക്രൈസിസ് മാനേജ്മെന്റ് ഇപ്പോഴും കേരളത്തിൽ പലതരത്തിലുള്ള അക്സെപ്റ്റൻസ് ക്യൂർ ആളുകൾക്ക് കിട്ടിയിട്ടുണ്ടെന്ന് പറയുന്ന സാഹചര്യത്തിൽ തന്നെ ക്രൈസിസ് മാനേജ്മെന്റ് വളരെ ഭയങ്കര ഡിഫിക്കൽട്ട് ആയിട്ടുള്ള ഒരു അവസ്ഥയിൽ തന്നെയാണ് ഇപ്പോഴും തുടരുന്നത്. ബിക്കോസ് ആളുകൾക്ക് വീട് വിട്ട് ഇറങ്ങി വരുന്ന കമ്മ്യൂണിറ്റി നടത്തുന്ന ആളുകൾക്ക് നിൽക്കാൻ ഒരു സ്ഥലം ഇല്ലാതിരിക്കുന്ന ഒരു അവസ്ഥയുണ്ട്. പലപ്പോഴും സഹയാത്രിയുടെ ഒരു യാത്രയിൽ സഹയാത്രി എപ്പോഴും ക്രൈസിസുകൾ ചെയ്യുമ്പോൾ കമ്മ്യൂണിറ്റി ആളുകളെ അക്കോമഡേറ്റ് ചെയ്യാൻ സ്വന്തം വീടുകളോ അല്ലെങ്കിൽ സ്റ്റാഫുകളുടെ വീടുകളോ നമ്മള് കമ്മ്യൂണിറ്റി ആളുകളുടെ വീടുകളോ അതൊക്കെയാണ് തിരഞ്ഞെടുക്കുന്നത്. ഇപ്പോഴും 2020 നമുക്ക് അതേ ഒരു അവസ്ഥ തന്നെയാണ്. ക്രൈസിസ് മാനേജ്മെന്റിൽ ഒരു തരത്തിലുള്ള ഒരു സപ്പോർട്ട് ഗവൺമെന്റിന്റെ ഭാഗത്തു നിന്ന് എന്തെങ്കിലും ഇതിലേക്കായിട്ട് ഉണ്ടായിട്ടുണ്ടെന്നോ തോന്നിയിട്ടില്ല. അപ്പം അതിലൊന്നും ഒരു മാറ്റവും വരാൻ ഇതുവരെ കഴിഞ്ഞിട്ടില്ല എന്നുള്ളതുകൊണ്ട് തന്നെ നമ്മൾ കൂടുതലായിട്ട് സംസാരിക്കേണ്ടതുണ്ട്.
Actually, you talk a little, then I'll translate.
Yeah.
I'm missing pictures. Like so she's saying that one of the main work that we're doing is crisis intervention, and she said she wanted to point out, like, you know, since, like, she thinks in the beginning when Sahayatrika did crisis intervention, it was very difficult. There were a lot of limitations. There wasn't any sort of social support for the issues. And the thing is, she's been working, that she was working, now she's program coordinator, she's been working as the community organizer. But she's saying that now, even though there's been many changes in terms of like the legal situation, governmental support, that doing crisis intervention is still very difficult, you know, and that you still don't really, like, you know, for all the sort of, you know, public discussions that, you know, that you know, things are happening in Kerala, that you don't have you know, people don't have awareness of the issues, and that we still struggle with crisis. You know, we don't have a shelter, so we still look for, you know, there's still so many people who can't stay in their homes, and then when they're leaving their homes, you know, there's not a place to go. We end up keeping them in our still. And she said that that the government, I think the government itself, you know, although they are promoting themselves as like having a transgender, like, you know, being transgender friendly, and, you know, having some sort of support for our issues, there still is not a lot of understanding of issues within government. We don't actually support from the government, so there's still a lot of limitations and difficulties in doing crisis work. People in the culture Sahaja campaign, okay, yeah, it's like
പിന്നെ ഇപ്പോ സഹയാത്രി കൂടുതലായിട്ടും കേരളത്തിൽ ഇപ്പം ട്രാൻസ് വ്യക്തികളെ അംഗീകരിച്ചുകൊണ്ടുള്ള ഒരു ഗവൺമെന്റ് നിലനിൽക്കുന്നതുകൊണ്ട് തന്നെ സർക്കാർ സംവിധാനങ്ങൾ, സർക്കാർ സ്കീമുകളൊക്കെ കൂടുതലായിട്ട് നടപ്പിലാക്കുന്നുണ്ട്. ട്രാൻസ്ജെൻഡർ വിഷയങ്ങൾ അല്ലെങ്കിൽ ട്രാൻസ് ആളുകളുടെ പ്രശ്നങ്ങളെയാണ് കൂടുതലും ഇപ്പോൾ ഒരു ചർച്ചയിലേക്കൊക്കെ വരുന്ന ഒരു സാഹചര്യം കേരളത്തിലുള്ളത്. എനിക്ക് തോന്നുന്നു മറ്റ് ലൈംഗിക ന്യൂനപക്ഷങ്ങളെ പറ്റിയിട്ടുള്ള ഒരു ചർച്ചയോ അല്ലെങ്കിൽ അത്തരം ആളുകളുടെ ഒരു അത്ര സജീവമായിട്ട് നടക്കുന്നില്ലെന്നാണ്.
just translate and then
Yeah.
So yeah, so she's saying that the thing is, there's been regarding trans issues, there's been a certain amount of government support and initiatives around it, so that
you have a shelter home, no? You have a trans men shelter home.
No.
We wrote a proposal for a trans men's shelter home. It was given to another organization, but yes, and we'd like to talk about that, actually. Not about that, but about the issue of shelter, right? Like, even for the transfer. But I just finished what saying, but she was also making the point that, like, there, you know, like, there are certain, I mean, there are certain programs that are initiatives that have been taken for the trans communities, but the awareness of other sexuality minority communities, the government discussion is much less. So that also, like, there's less awareness about other identities, right? That's what she said.
Yeah.
ഗവൺമെന്റ് ഷെൽട്ടർ ഹോമുകൾ കേരളത്തിൽ നിലനിൽക്കുന്നുണ്ട്. ഗവൺമെന്റ് ട്രാൻസ്ജെൻഡർ ആളുകൾക്ക് വേണ്ടി പക്ഷെ അതേസമയം മറ്റ് സെക്സ്വാലിറ്റി അഡ്രസ് ചെയ്യുന്ന ആളുകൾക്ക് വേണ്ടിയിട്ടോ അല്ലെങ്കിൽ ട്രാൻസ്ജെൻഡർ പാർട്ട്നേഴ്സ് ആയിട്ടുള്ള ആളുകൾക്ക് വേണ്ടിയിട്ടൊക്കെ ഒരു ഷെൽട്ടർ സംവിധാനം നിലനിൽക്കുന്നില്ല. അപ്പം ഞാൻ പറയാൻ ശ്രമിക്കുന്നത്, ഇപ്പം ഗവൺമെന്റ് നമ്മളെ ക്യൂർ ആളുകളെ അംഗീകരിക്കുന്ന സാഹചര്യത്തിൽ ക്യൂർ ആളുകളുടെ ജീവിത സാഹചര്യങ്ങൾ എന്തൊക്കെയാണ്, അവരുടെ നീഡ്സ് എന്താണെന്ന് കൃത്യമായിട്ടൊരു പഠനം നടത്താതെയാണ് ഇവിടെ നടക്കുന്ന എല്ലാ അല്ലെങ്കിൽ പദ്ധതികൾ നടപ്പിലാക്കുമ്പോഴാണ് ആകട്ടെ. അപ്പൊ അത്തരത്തില് ക്യൂർ ആളുകളുടെ അവസ്ഥകളെ പറ്റിയിട്ടും ആവശ്യങ്ങളെ പറ്റിയിട്ടും കൃത്യമായിട്ടുള്ള ഒരു പഠനം സർക്കാരിന്റെ ഭാഗത്തു നിന്ന് ഉണ്ടാവാത്തത് കൊണ്ടുള്ള പലതരത്തിലുള്ള ബുദ്ധിമുട്ടുകൾ നിലനിൽക്കുന്നുണ്ട്. ഈ പറഞ്ഞ പോലെ തന്നെ ഷെൽട്ടർ ഹോമിന്റെ കാര്യം തന്നെ നമ്മൾ കാലങ്ങളായിട്ട് ക്യൂർ പൊളിറ്റിക്സ് തുടങ്ങിയ കാലം തൊട്ട് തന്നെ നമ്മൾ എല്ലാവരും ഒരുമിച്ച് നിന്നുകൊണ്ടാണ് ഇത്തരം അവകാശങ്ങളെ പറ്റി സംസാരിച്ചിരിക്കുന്നത്. ട്രാൻസ്ജെൻഡർ ആളുകൾക്ക് വിസിബിലിറ്റി കിട്ടിയ സമയത്ത് തന്നെ ഈ ട്രാൻസ് വുമൺ ആളുകൾക്കും ട്രാൻസ് മെൻ ആളുകൾക്കും രണ്ട് തരത്തിലുള്ള ജീവിത സാഹചര്യങ്ങളുണ്ട്, പലപ്പോഴും ഉണ്ട്. പല ഐ മീൻ ട്രാൻസ്മെൻ ആയ ഒരാൾ കമ്മിങ് ഔട്ട് നടത്തുമ്പോൾ വീട്ടിൽ നിന്ന് വരുന്ന സമയത്ത് ചിലപ്പോൾ ഓൾമോസ്റ്റ് ടൈമിൽ അവരുടെ ഒരു പാർട്ട്ണർ ഉണ്ടാവാം. അപ്പം അവരെ എവിടെ താമസിപ്പിക്കുക, അല്ലെങ്കിൽ അങ്ങനത്തെ സാഹചര്യങ്ങളിൽ കൂടെ വീട് വിട്ട് ഇറങ്ങേണ്ടി വരുന്ന ആളുകളുണ്ട്. അവർക്ക് എങ്ങനെ പ്രൊട്ടക്ഷൻ നൽകാം എന്നുള്ളൊരു ആലോചന സർക്കാരിന്റെ ഭാഗത്ത് നിന്ന് ഉണ്ടാവുന്നില്ല. അപ്പൊ നമുക്കറിയാം പല കാര്യത്തിൽ ലിമിറ്റേഷൻ ഉണ്ട്. സ്റ്റെപ്പ് ആയിട്ടാണ് ഓരോ കാര്യങ്ങൾ നടക്കുക. പക്ഷെ അത് ഞാൻ മനസ്സിലാക്കുന്നത് അത് അങ്ങനെ സംഭവിച്ചിട്ടുള്ളത് കൃത്യമായിട്ടുള്ള ഇല്ലാത്തതുകൊണ്ടാണ്, അല്ലെങ്കിൽ എന്തൊക്കെയാണ് ആളുകളുടെ പ്രശ്നം എന്ന് മനസ്സിലാക്കാത്തതുകൊണ്ടാണ്.
Okay, the translation. So first of all, she was saying that like the thing is about like like we actually wrote a proposal from shelter for trans men and other community people, and for various reasons our proposal was accepted, but then for some technical reasons we weren't able to get it, and so they did start a trans men shelter. But the thing is, the understanding is based only on this issue of gender identity. There's no understanding of sexuality, right? So like one problem with that transgender shelter is that with the government notion of transgender shelter, it's only for trans men. So just like, you know, she was saying that usually when trans men leave their house, they very often leave with a partner, right? But the partner is not able to access the shelter, and also, you know, we were told that, you know, if we have a trans men shelter, you know, we would not be able to bring other identities in. So if there's lesbians at home, we wouldn't be able to put them in that shelter. So it's kind of like a narrow understanding of the issue. And she was saying that she was saying that the government actually they haven't done much research into these issues of queer identities and sexuality identities. They have a certain amount of understanding, and even, I mean, I think most trans people would say that the government understanding of transgender issues is, you know, government officials and stuff is very limited, you know, and then within that, trans men are marginalized compared to trans women. So most of the government initiatives are focused on the needs of trans women. And so, but there's also, I mean, you know, our identities are broader than that. And so the government actually doesn't have very much, there hasn't been enough studies or enough research. Maybe we should do the research about like how, about these different identities and how that they're impacted in the society. So, you know, there's a certain, yeah. So because there was a transgender policy that was, you know, and that came into place. So that theoretical understanding is there. I think many trans people will also say that what the benefits they get from that is quite limited, you know, but then other identities have not really come into the government radar.
Yeah. So has Sahayatrika worked with international organizations or with other national organizations, done collaborations with other, you know, progressive groups? What was the experience like, and how was it?
Yeah, it's Manslayo question. I'll answer something, and maybe like Sunil can. Yeah, we've always based, we always had, alliances have always been important. Internationally, it's more around having support from like progressive funders and things. I mean, I think myself and Bina, we were involved in this for a while, this like making a South Asian commission for marginalized sexualities. And I think we, on the national level, we've involved in other campaigns, like for 377, we were counted, we would go to meetings. we've done meetings with other groups, like we've been to like Nazariya, we've been to like, Hannah's come to something that was organized by Nazariya, or Sappho has had LGBT meets. We do quite a bit of work, like, Sunil is in Rahi. And so like with Bangalore, we have kind of a long history of work. They had a shelter in Bangalore. So for a long time, we were going from Kerala to Bangalore. So we have this kind of long working relationship. I think we should probably, like, on the national, and I think actually for national, international, because we're more and more community oriented and more like local oriented, and our staff, some of our board members, like everyone, like people that come from marginalized backgrounds. So I think that language is a big issue in terms of the types of alliances we make. It's across state and stuff. We do, we've worked with Sati, we've done a workshop with Maravala, so we do things, but that is a limitation. And it's quite, I think it's actually quite one of the reasons I was interested in this series is I think it's quite important for us to know what other LGBT groups are doing and what their perspectives are, and what common struggles we have, what differences. Within Kerala, we always have allied with kind of progressive groups, people who are willing to recognize our rights, and with the feminist movement, with Dalit movements, with different like anti-fascist movements, we've always had alliances just personally and then sometimes organizationally. And maybe Hannah, you can talk about that, like some, namada vere organization
കേരളത്തിൽ സഹയാത്രിയുടെ ഒരു തുടക്കം തൊട്ട് തന്നെ നമ്മൾ സഹയാത്രിക ക്യൂർ വിഷയങ്ങളും ഫെമിനിസ്റ്റ് വിഷയങ്ങളും കൂടെ ഒരുമിച്ച് സംസാരിച്ചുകൊണ്ട് യാത്രയെടുക്കണം എനിക്ക് തോന്നുന്നു. അതുപോലെ തന്നെ നമ്മൾ സഹയാത്രിയുടെ സവിശേഷതയായിട്ട് ഞാൻ മനസ്സിലാക്കുന്നത് ക്യൂർ ഐഡന്റിറ്റികൾക്കുള്ളിൽ തന്നെ മറ്റ് പല ഐഡന്റിറ്റി പ്രശ്നങ്ങൾ നേരിടുന്ന ആളുകളുണ്ട്. അതേസമയം പലതരത്തിൽ ഒരേ സമയം മാർജിനൈസ്ഡായിട്ട് നിൽക്കുന്ന ആളുകളുണ്ട്. അത്തരം ആളുകളുടെ വിഷയങ്ങൾ നമ്മൾ അഡ്രസ് ചെയ്യുകയും അത്ര ഒരു ഫോക്കസോട് കൂടി തന്നെ പ്രവർത്തിക്കുന്നു എന്നാണ് മനസ്സിലാക്കുന്നത്. അതിന്റെ ഭാഗമായിട്ട് തന്നെ പലതരത്തിലുള്ള പബ്ലിക് പ്രോഗ്രാമുകളൊക്കെ നമ്മൾ മറ്റു മൂവ്മെന്റുകളോട് അസോസിയേറ്റ് ചെയ്യാറുണ്ട്. തൃശ്ശൂരിൽ നടക്കുന്ന അത്തരം സാംസ്കാരിക പ്രവർത്തനങ്ങളൊക്കെ സഹയാത്രിയുടെ ഒരു പ്രാതിനിധ്യം ഉണ്ടാകാറുണ്ട്. അങ്ങനെ ഒരു നെറ്റ്വർക്ക് ബിൽഡ് ചെയ്യാൻ സഹയാത്രിക്ക് കഴിഞ്ഞിട്ടുണ്ടോ എന്നുള്ളത് വലിയൊരു നേട്ടമായിട്ടാണ് നമുക്ക്.
Okay, so I think she said he added point. Sunil, are you ready to translate?
From the beginning of.
From the beginning of.
Yeah, from the beginning of Sahayatrika's work, Sahayatrika will talk, like Sahayatrika's ideology and talking, everything was addressing feminism and sexuality.
Mm-hmm.
It's been a long journey with this politics. So because of that only we have kind of a network we could build.
Yeah, I think she said like that, because like when we look at each individual, all these other factors are impacting on their lives. So it's we needed to be involved with other movements too, like, whether it's around like class or caste or different things like that, because of we have to address the things that that our community members are experiencing in our lives. So then it was important to make alliances with other groups. Okay. Who have we been working with recently? Like what type of things? You said that like locally, for sure, we've been doing like different types of activism. Examples?
Anti-fascist programകളൊക്കെ സംഘടിപ്പിക്കുന്നു.
Participating in anti-fascist programs. Or I think like that there's a fact finding, for those 2 girls who committed suicide, those 2 other girls.
You brought out a statement about Kanjana Harish's.
Yes.
And also suicide. Also, yeah.
Yes.
And I think the thing is because I think that because of Sahayatrika's existence in Kerala, and our part have been like pushing this, like when we say trans also, it's always the understanding is the trans woman. So we have been like pushing trans men's issue in that, and with the government, we have been like, we have had several, we have sent letters to governments like that. Making that visibility is like very much because of the existence of Sahayatrika and a constant engagement with the sexuality and gender groups or other groups or with the government. See, wherever like when they say trans, everything is defined in the understanding of trans woman, not trans. So we have been bringing out saying that like this is the thing, and there is a community like this which is there, and it is the both the communities this thing is different. So we've been like doing that, and I would say that like in what in 2003 2004 until 2008 people have been like migrating from there to
Bangalore. Yeah.
Right? Now the trans men and partners and whoever is existing in Kerala. Just because of Sahayatrika's involvement only. And through the crisis intervention, what we have done is like if the police also like started if somebody is missing from somewhere, some complaint comes, so they call the Sahayatrika number and ask. Anybody came there, or do you know? So that's a kind of awareness we could create.
Yeah, you have been able to build Sahayatrika into that space where people have support, and the government is also taking cognizance of the fact that you guys exist. Yeah. Great. And so Deepa and Ahana and Sunil, for you, when you look back from 2002, I think 2002, right? 2002 till now, how do you describe Sahayatrika's journey to our audience? Like, what makes you smile? What makes you cringe? What makes you feel victorious about? What are those moments that you want to share with our audience? Some victories, some challenges, some happy moments, those small little things that you have done that over the years that you think that the audience and the mainland should know about it. Because it's mostly, when you talk about queer activism, it's mostly Delhi, Bombay. That's what we hear about. We don't get to hear about what other small cities are doing. And it's very important that we let people know what you have been doing that our audience should know about.
Deepa?
I have lots of things to say. Do you guys want to say anything? And show them on Slayer. There's like for me, like except like now, the last few years, like I've I haven't been as involved in like crisis intervention and day-to-day things, but it's a huge part of my life. So I have so many things to say. That's why I'd like them to all say things. I think the thing that I think like we have many victories, and many problems. I mean, the victories have to do with introducing Sahayatrika into the social, introducing people and registering an organization, having an organization where queer people from marginalized backgrounds have leadership, and have voice. We've done many important crisis cases that we've handled. But for me, I think like the most touching thing for me personally is about the community, and that people, like I started this as a project. It was like, 10-month project. Let's see what happens if people want to continue it. Right? And, 2 years ago, before we became a completely community-based organization, we had an organization in Kerala was our fiscal sponsor, and they lost their FCRA permission, and so we didn't have any funds or offices for a year. We didn't know where the organization was. What happened? But the thing that I feel really touched about is that many people identified with Sahayatrika, and everyone had a different idea about what the organization is, or what it means, or what its politics are. But the thing is, like, so many people, and we've had so many fights, and people leave, and all these things, people say terrible things about the organization. But the thing is, when it wasn't there, or when its existence was threatened, many people had a very strong identification with it, and it's very touching for me. Like the first year after the project, and we decided not to accept funding, it wasn't actually, we weren't actually continuing Sahayatrika. It's just that people kept meeting, they kept having crisis, and people kept using the name, and so it just kept existing, and I think that that's something that's very touching and meaningful for me, and especially because, like, when we first started doing these suicide fact findings, and people were saying that these people don't actually exist, and they're committing suicide because of poverty, or and then, like, all these people who came, their stories were the same as the fact findings. They had the same experiences, and now our organization, those are the people who are running the organization, or who are involved in the organization, and for me, that's a very touching.
എന്നെ സംബന്ധിച്ചിടത്തോളം വളരെ സന്തോഷം തോന്നുന്നൊരു കാര്യം എന്ന് പറഞ്ഞാൽ ഇപ്പൊ ഒരുപാട് ആളുകൾ കമ്മിങ് ഔട്ട് നടത്തുന്നുണ്ട്. ഇപ്പോഴത്തെ ഒരു സാഹചര്യത്തിൽ കേരളത്തിൽ ഹോമോസെക്ഷൽ ആയിട്ടുള്ള ആളുകളാണ് ഒരുപാട് കമ്മിങ് ഔട്ടുകൾ നടത്തുന്നുണ്ട്. അതുപോലെ തന്നെ നിലവിൽ കേരളത്തിൽ ട്രാൻസ് വുമൺ ആളുകൾക്ക് അല്ലെങ്കിൽ ട്രാൻസ്ജെൻഡർ വ്യക്തികൾക്കുള്ള അത്ര വിസിബിലിറ്റി മറ്റ് ലൈംഗിക ന്യൂനപക്ഷങ്ങൾക്ക് ഇല്ലെങ്കിൽ തന്നെയും ആളുകൾ മുന്നോട്ട് വരാൻ പലതരത്തില് സംഘടനാ തലത്തിലെങ്കിലും ഐഡന്റിഫൈ ചെയ്യാനും ഇത്തരം കാര്യങ്ങൾ, ഇത്തരം സംഘടനകളിലേക്ക് എത്തിപ്പെടാനുള്ള ഒരു സാഹചര്യം നൽകുന്നുണ്ട്. സന്തോഷമാണ്. കാരണം നമുക്ക് സഹായത്തിൽ തുടങ്ങുന്നത് തന്നെ ക്യൂർ ആളുകൾക്ക് അവർക്ക് കൂടെ നിൽക്കുന്ന സംഘടനകളോ വ്യക്തികളോ ഇല്ലെന്നുള്ള അറിവിൽ ആളുകൾ ബുദ്ധിമുട്ടുകയും ആത്മഹത്യ ചെയ്യുകയൊക്കെ ചെയ്യുന്ന ഒരു സാഹചര്യത്തിൽ നിന്നാണ് സഹയാത്രയുടെ ഒരു തുടക്കം തന്നെ ഉണ്ടാകുന്നത്. അങ്ങനത്തെ ഒരു സാഹചര്യത്തിൽ ഇപ്പൊ നമ്മളിലേക്ക് ആളുകൾക്ക് എത്തിപ്പെടാനുള്ള ഒരു സാഹചര്യങ്ങൾ ഉണ്ടാകുന്നുണ്ടെന്ന് പറയുന്നത് വളരെ സന്തോഷമാണ്. അതേസമയം തന്നെ ഏറ്റവും വിഷമകരമായ ഒരു കാര്യം ഈ അടുത്ത കാലത്ത് ഉണ്ടായെന്ന് പറയുന്നത് അഞ്ജനയുടെ ആത്മഹത്യയായിട്ട് ബന്ധപ്പെട്ടുള്ള വിഷയമാണ്. വളരെ കാലങ്ങളായി കേരളത്തിൽ ക്യൂർ ഫ്രണ്ട്ലി ആയിട്ടുള്ള ഒരു സാഹചര്യം ഉണ്ടെന്നും ക്യൂർ ഫ്രണ്ട്ലി ആയിട്ടുള്ള ഒരു അന്തരീക്ഷം ക്യൂർ ആളുകൾക്ക് ഉണ്ടെന്നും വിചാരിച്ചിരിക്കുന്ന ഒരു അവസ്ഥയിൽ, അല്ലെങ്കിൽ അത്തരം സ്റ്റേറ്റ്മെന്റുകൾ നിലനിൽക്കുന്ന ഒരു സാഹചര്യത്തിലാണ് അഞ്ജനയുടെ മരണവുമായിട്ട് ബന്ധപ്പെട്ട് എങ്ങനെയാണ് ക്യൂർ ആളുകളോട് മറ്റാളുകളുടെ സമീപനം എന്തായിരുന്നു, ക്യൂർ മനുഷ്യരെ എത്രത്തോളം നോക്കി കണ്ടു, എത്രത്തോളം അവരുടെ പ്രശ്നങ്ങൾ മനസ്സിലാക്കുന്നുണ്ടെന്നുള്ളതും നമുക്ക് നോക്കി കാണാൻ പറ്റിയിട്ടുണ്ട് ഈ ഒരു വിഷയം. പിന്നെ കൺവേർഷൻ തെറാപ്പി പോലെയുള്ള അത്രയും ഗൗരവപരമായ വിഷയങ്ങളെ അഡ്രസ് ചെയ്യാൻ പറ്റുന്നില്ല ഇവിടുത്തെ സർക്കാരിനോ അല്ലെങ്കിൽ ഇവിടുത്തെ ഏതെങ്കിലും തരത്തിലുള്ള സംവിധാനങ്ങൾക്കോ അതിനെ അഡ്രസ് ചെയ്യാൻ പറ്റുന്നില്ല എന്നുള്ളതും ഇപ്പോഴും അതിന്റെ അനുഭവങ്ങൾ ആളുകൾ നേരിടും.
Okay. She's saying that she's really happy about what's happened in recent years because more people are coming out, and again she said that the trans women's movement has more visibility, but many people in their own capacities are coming out about their gender, their sexuality, if they're trans, if they're gay, if they're queer, and she's really happy about that, and that many organizations are there now. Like we have with many organizations and many individuals, because she thinks that's something that Sahayatrika sort of groups now. And she says at the same time something that's very sad and very, tragic is this Anjana's suicide, because the thing is, we felt like there's so much more visibility and more organizations and more support, like relatively speaking, but still, people can commit suicide and still a suicide like that can happen. And yan misari ay
കൺവേർഷൻ തെറാപ്പിയെ കുറിച്ച് കൂടി സംസാരിച്ചു.
നീ വീണ്ടും പറയൂ.
എൻ്റെ ഒരു അനുഭവത്തിൽ നിന്ന് തന്നെ നമ്മൾ നേരിട്ടുള്ള ക്രൈസിസുകൾ, ക്യൂർ ആളുകളുടെ ക്രൈസിസുകൾ മാനേജ് ചെയ്യുമ്പോൾ ഒരു 90% ആളുകളും ഇത്തരത്തില് കൺവേർഷൻ തെറാപ്പി പോലെയുള്ള ചികിത്സകൾ നേരിടേണ്ടി വരുന്ന സാഹചര്യമുണ്ട്. അത് ട്രാൻസ്ജെൻഡർ വ്യക്തികൾക്കുണ്ട്, എല്ലാ ക്യൂർ ആളുകൾക്കും നേരിടേണ്ടി വരുന്നുണ്ട്. ട്രാൻസ് വിഷയങ്ങളുടെ, ട്രാൻസ് ആളുകളുടെ പ്രശ്നങ്ങളെ അഡ്രസ് ചെയ്യുന്ന ഒരു സ്റ്റേറ്റിന്റെ ഭാഗത്ത് സംവിധാനത്തിൽ എന്തുകൊണ്ടാണ് കൺവേർഷൻ തെറാപ്പി പോലെയുള്ള കാര്യങ്ങളെ പറ്റിയിട്ട് ഒരു ചർച്ച പോലും നടക്കുന്നില്ല എന്നുള്ളത് വളരെ വിഷമകരമായിട്ടുള്ളൊരു കാര്യമാണ്. അപ്പോൾ അഞ്ജനയുടെ മരണം നടക്കുന്ന സമയത്ത് തന്നെ ഈ വിഷയങ്ങളെ അഡ്രസ് ചെയ്യാനായിട്ട് വളരെ ആരും തന്നെ തയ്യാറായിരുന്നില്ല എന്നുള്ളൊരു അവസ്ഥ ഉണ്ടായിട്ടുണ്ട്. ക്യൂർ ജീവിതങ്ങളെ പറ്റി എനിക്ക് തോന്നുന്നു കേരളത്തിൽ ഒരു ട്രാൻസ് അക്സെപ്റ്റൻസ് ഉണ്ടായതിനു ശേഷം തന്നെ ഒരുപാട് ആളുകൾ, ഇപ്പോൾ പുരോഗമന ഇടങ്ങളിലുള്ള ആളുകളാണെങ്കിൽ തന്നെ ഒരുപാട് ആളുകൾ ക്യൂർ രാഷ്ട്രീയത്തോട് ഐക്യദാർഢ്യം പ്രഖ്യാപിച്ച് നിൽക്കുന്ന ആളുകളുണ്ടായിരുന്നു. പക്ഷെ ഇവരെ എല്ലാവരും തന്നെയും ഈ ക്യൂർ ആളുകളുടെ പ്രശ്നങ്ങളെ മനസ്സിലാക്കിയിട്ടാണ്. കൺഫ്യൂഷൻ ഉണ്ട്. അത് അത്തരത്തിലൊരു മനസ്സിലാക്കുന്ന ആളുകൾക്ക് ഉണ്ടായിട്ടില്ല എന്നുള്ളതിന്റെ വ്യക്തമായിട്ടുള്ള ഒരു ഉദാഹരണമായിരുന്നു ഈ ഒരു വിഷയത്തിന് ശേഷം ഉണ്ടായിട്ടുള്ള ചർച്ചകൾ എന്നുള്ളത് ആണ് എനിക്ക് തോന്നുന്നത്.
So she's talking about this issue of conversion therapy, and she's saying it's been such a reality for so many people in Kerala, whether they're trans or whether they're queer or whatever, be taken to have their identity. People try to forcibly change their identity. And she says that one of the sad things about Anjana's death is, like, even when this happened, there were so many unwilling to address that. And I think she was especially talking about the left, and that there were a lot of kind of attacks and a lot of people not understanding the issue or being very ignorant about the issue and about queer issues generally. And so it kind of showed how even in this so-called like leftist and progressive spaces, this even though we've made a lot of gains, this understanding hasn't completely arrived. And so because when there was this huge kind of media thing around Anjana's suicide, and to kind of frame her friends and say she was like a lesbian jihadi and all these things, and it came from these BJP affiliated people, but it also came from some leftist groups also. So that's kind of and some progressive people also. So that's also kind of a disappointment, and that there's a lot that needs to be done in terms of people's awareness.
Yeah, that too people who are progressive and saying, okay, from that kind of people, these kind of things comes out. That is very, so then the question is how much people have understood what stand they have taken or what support they are giving without this understanding. I feel that is tokenistic. I have seen that in several spaces, because now an issue comes to be politically correct. People start showing that we are inclusive. That inclusiveness is tokenistic. That kind of groups is there everywhere. And this conversion therapy, also the thing is it happens in several places. In the sense of not only as a psychiatric institution, it is other kinds of things also happens. Some
I want to
religious based
yes
things also happens to a lot of people.
I just wanted to just, I mean, I think that's true what you're both saying. I just wanted, if we're just looking at this big, like 20-year perspective, like, I think that's true. And now it's kind of fashionable, it's kind of politically correct to support queer issues, to support trans issues, but very often, whether it's at the level of government or our political supporters, people don't actually, they don't know that much about it. And very often, you know, in the, you know, when if you're put in a tight corner, then all these very like homophobic and transphobic sort of ignorances come forward. But I just from my, I would just like to say that, having said that, I mean, I much prefer to be in this place now where it's politically correct than where we started, where it was kind of politically correct to be opposed to, you know, like queer identities and trans identities. Like, I mean, if people are at least, I mean, we have a lot more work to do, you know, but I mean, it's, you know, it's like,
that's what I also feel that, like, now, like, so many years of work we have did, and the good thing is, like, no, like, earlier I said, like, now people don't need to kind of leave their space and run away from there. They are existing in their own spaces only. That is a good thing which have happened. And through the crisis intervention, a kind of advocacy which we did is the police sensitization and things like that. Is one thing. And I feel like here is the thing, like, now how much ever the law changes, if the people's consciousness is not changed, that is what something which has to change, I feel. So now we have to work towards that. And it will not be like earlier, because earlier there was no law and all these things were there, and it was a criminalized thing. Now everything is open to us. Now towards towards people's consciousness changing is something which we have to. I don't know how many years we have to do that now. Still the struggle is there.
True.
Never ending.
Yeah, true. Pavel, you are there. You want to ask some questions that I might have left out? Or it's there in your...
Hi. Yes, I'm here.
Yeah.
It's really interesting to hear about all the story. I also have some friends in Kerala, so it was something very close to heart as well. Gayatri, Aryan and all of them, Ritu and I know them very well. So it's really nice to hear about this perspective. Yeah.
Do you have any particular question, comment that you want to ask?
No, I think it was fairly covered.
Yeah. Okay. You last comments, anything? We don't have any comments on Facebook, but we'll upload this video on YouTube and we'll send you the link once it's uploaded. You can share it across. By next week, we'll be able to upload the video and we'll send you the link and all. But any last comments or
anything we missed out, anything you just like take your time, because the session is till 6:30. We still have 20 minutes whereby you can just like tell us anything that we couldn't sort of like reached out.
I want, do you want to say, like, well, first of all, I'm really happy to, I wish we kind of had the Zoom thing and we got to see people more. And we met you in the beginning and we just saw you again now, you know, just to get those questions. I would really, I hope these talks continue. I only found out about them after Sunil told me, and I would really like to know what other LBT groups are doing and stuff. And even this whole, like this, you know, like this LBT identity also, you know, what is it? And you know, like, and how we deal with all these like different identities. I think, historically, and I mean, not exclusively, but we we've sort of continued to identify as a group that works primarily with people who are gender assigned female at birth for different reasons. But I see that we do have trans women also, and like in the past also trans women who've been very supportive, important to Sahayatrika, and so I think that idea of what LBT is, because I've noticed that other groups are LBT and the T is open, you know, like that seems when I've heard you say that with the Parna Sappho and labia, and so I think that's a very it's a interesting and important discussion, you know, because you know, and yeah.
I was thinking that we should have a meeting about it, about what groups are doing and how can we exchange information about each other's work, and how can we inform each other's work. I think we should have that kind of meeting sometime. I don't know, Zoom meetings or whatever meeting. We can think of exchanging information. We would love to hear from you guys about the kind of work that you do. How can we learn from you guys also? I think yeah.
One thing that I thought which I got a sense about the community in Kerala is also how they are very well connected to the artist community. So that was really interesting. Things like that, like be specific, you know, like regions and all, they will also present a certain sort of say relationship with the environment, and so I think that is also important to also explore the kind of allyship that you are. I mean, it was really this time during Anjana's case when progressive people itself came and blamed the community. At the same time, yeah, like the artist community and the queer community there, and the sort of idea of queerness that is there in Kerala is quite really interesting. It's very eccentric, but at the same time, it's not something very much about gender and sexuality, but it's more on, I don't know, like it's just very, I mean, I to come to Kerala for that. So.
Okay. Neil, you want to say anything?
No. I think we skipped in like one thing. The like no, Sahayatrika is the first group which they came up with the idea of queer film festival in Kerala. That was the beginning. Do you remember?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think this art, engaging with artists and being artists is very important. Yeah. You know, and it's like, yeah, and we would like to, yeah, there are lots of different complexities in that too, but definitely,
yeah,
you know, I think more of us should be artists and, you know, tell our stories.
എനിക്ക് വളരെ സന്തോഷമുണ്ട്, കേൾക്കാൻ പറ്റിയ സന്തോഷമുണ്ട്. എനിക്ക് തോന്നുന്നു നമുക്ക് ഇത്തരം ചർച്ചകളൊക്കെ കണ്ടിന്യൂ ചെയ്യുകയാണെങ്കിൽ
she said she's very happy to participate in this, and she hopes that we can continue to have these discussions.
Yeah, we'd love to talk to you and learn from you. We have lots to learn.
Yeah.
But, especially in terms of crisis intervention, it's very difficult for us to, and we have to share those experiences with each other, so that like only recently, like 2 days back, we heard of a lesbian suicide in Muzaffarnagar in Uttar Pradesh, and it was quite sad. And these news don't get reported much. So despite working so much, despite being present so much, there are lesbian suicides happening.
Still happen.
And it is happening. so many cases of violence happening, and then we feel that it is important that we share those information so that we work like a network, and something we can do to reduce some amount of violence.
Yeah. See, you know what? I feel like, you know, all of these LGBT collectives, I mean, we're very, sometimes in some ways we're very different, in some ways we're very similar, but we're all facing very similar struggles, you know, and like, you have a shelter, like, you know, like, I don't like how are other, you know, like, I think these are things like I would really like to know also what other groups are doing. Like, you know, how do you deal with people leaving their homes? Do you have places for them to stay, you know? But you locate them in other shelters, or, you know, like, you know, so there's, I think like these discussions are
important, and we need to have a meeting, maybe Sunil and Deepa and all, and we can have a meeting about shelter homes and how can we talk about shelter homes and other stuff. Anyway, thank you for now. Thank you so much, Ahana, Deepa, Sunil. We'll upload the video soon and send you the link. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.